Men's Brains, The Male Brain Explained Through Neural Analysis. Written by Quinn Spencer. Narrated by Eric Boozer. Introduction. Female Brains versus Male Brains. A new book that recently hit the market proclaims that women are much better than men when it comes to remembering the emotional times of their life. The female brain, women tend to remember the emotional events of their lives better than men because women's brains are structured differently and contain a different set of chemicals than their male counterparts. The book cited scientific studies that used PET and MRI scans to support this conclusion. The authors also cited over 60 pages of references to support her findings. In this regard, the book said that the main difference between men and women is that women's brains had a larger hippocampus, which is the organ in the brain that stores emotions and produces memory formation. Women's brains also have larger areas for language than men. The book said that these differences are more pronounced during the 8th week of pregnancy when the female brain experiences a testosterone surge. On the other hand, and not surprisingly, men were found to have larger brain areas of aggression and action. Brizendine also revealed that men's brains also have 2.5 times more space than women's brains for the sexual drive. Here are some of the other interesting revelations in the book. Men experience love at first sight more easily than women, according to the chapter on love and trust. Women are more attracted to symmetrical men because such men are said to give them better and more frequent orgasm, according to the chapter on sex, and citing the results of a study involving 86 sexually active 22-year-old couples. Handsome and symmetrical men tend to be more unfaithful and cheat more often than men with less well-balanced bodies. On the last item, it appears that women now face a tough choice, to either have a great sex life with a handsome, symmetrical partner who will likely cheat on them or settle for a less well-balanced male who will be faithful but lousy in bed. Chapter 1. The Mystery of the Human Brain Size. A lot of times we often confuse whether the brain size has something to do with its ability. As we all know now, the size of the average modern man's brain is smaller than the ancestors, but our view of the universe, unwelled, is much better compared to theirs. Does this mean that size has nothing to do with the brain's ability? Or there's something that we don't know yet about the mystery of human brain? What about men? Did the study come up with the same result? Right-handed men showed similar results for verbal skills, but no correlation registered among nourish-handed men. For lefties and ambidextrous males, brain volume did not predict how well they had done on the language test. Whittleson also found that for all men, overall brain size had no relation to visual spatial abilities. Yet, in one case, she found an exception. In earlier work, Whittleson had studied the anatomy of Albert Einstein's brain and showed that although it was of average overall size, the inferior parietal lobes were expanded. These regions are crucial to processing visual imagery. The study also revealed one interesting finding. As men age from 25 to 80, the size of their brain generally decreases, yet age barely alters brain size in women. And yet we still don't know the cause for this thing to happen. Perhaps there are things that meant to be mysterious. The different aging rates in men and women's brains. For years, practically everyone has known that men and women age differently. It has been common knowledge for several decades that men typically don't fare as well as women when it comes to getting older. As a result, they're more likely to get serious diseases later in life, and they are also more likely to pass away at a younger age. However, new research shows that the differences between men and women also exist in the brain. In fact, men and women's brains age at a far different rate. There are several key differences that should be explored more in depth. Perhaps the most important thing is that men's brains have a tendency to be better developed when it comes to things like muscle coordination and movement. For example, they might be able to balance on one foot better, or they may be more adept at a particular sport. They also might have better dexterity and hand-eye coordination than many women. With that being said, their brains also deteriorate at a much faster rate when it comes to things like movement, balance, and coordination. Regardless of how athletic a man might be in his prime, there is every chance that he will be far less capable as he gets older. In addition, the part of the brain that processes emotions, has a tendency to age much more quickly in men than it does in women. What does this mean for someone in a realistic sense? It often means that men are simply not capable of handling emotions in the same way that they have always done. Even someone who has always been very mature about his emotions and has managed to keep them in check during difficult circumstances may find himself exploding in rage or crying uncontrollably for no apparent reason. This is not necessarily the fault of the individual, but more likely because of the deterioration within the brain. As if that were not enough, women's brains age more slowly when it comes to that part of the brain that is responsible for memory. This basically means that women can usually remember better than men as they get older. Almost all men have significant deterioration in the part of the brain that is responsible for memory that is directly associated with advancing age. This might even make them susceptible to dementia and other memory-related diseases. One of the more interesting possibilities is that lifestyle could be hugely responsible for these differences. Scientists do not yet know if the differences between men and women's brains is hardwired or if it is a direct result of the lifestyle that each vendor chooses. Without a doubt, a great deal more research will have to be conducted before any definitive answers can be obtained concerning this particular question. One thing is certain, there are a lot of differences between men's and women's brains. As a result, more information can be found about these differences that can help people relate to each other in all aspects of their lives, especially as they grow older together. This research essentially represents the tip of the iceberg, and there is much more to be learned in the future. Why are men so hard to understand? The big 8 differences between men and women's brains. Most men always believe that understanding women is impossible. What men really need to understand is that we are totally different, and instead of giving up, we should try to embrace the differences and accept women for what they really are, nothing like us. Only then we can use all of this knowledge to our advantage. The following article illustrates the differences between the sexes and explains how we can use these to our advantage. Modern science has allowed us to study the male and female brains and come up with conclusions as to why we are so different. This is mainly down to how our brains are structured, and that's what this book is about. It will not teach you how to pick up women, but it will show you why we are so different. And as soon as you can get this around your head and accept women for what they really are, then your it will become much easier to succeed with them. Human relationships. Women communicate much better than men. They focus on how to create a solution that works for the entire group, talking through issues, and utilizes nonverbal cues, such as tone, emotion, and empathy. Men, on the other hand, tend to be more task-oriented, less talkative, and more isolated. Men have a hard time understanding emotions that are not spoken, while women tend to intuit emotions and emotional cues. These differences clearly explain why men and women sometimes have difficulty in communication, and why men-to-men friendships look different from friendships among women. What does this mean? If you ever spoke to a woman, got deep into a subject, and felt like you spoke a totally different language, this is the reason. In your step to understanding women, this is the first thing you need to get down. They are different. They are so different, in fact, that sometimes we can't even communicate. But if you can be more in control of your emotions, and I know no man wants to be in control of his emotions, they will not so much believe that you understand them, but feel it. Now, I'm not telling you to cry for hours after you watch The Notebook. However, I am telling you that being in tune with your emotions results in you being able to communicate with her at a different level, a level that most men do not get to. Left brain versus both hemispheres. Experts have proven that men process better in the left hemisphere, while women tend to process equally well between the two hemispheres. This difference clearly shows why men are stronger with left brain activities and approach problem solving with a task-oriented perspective, while women typically solve problems more creatively and are more aware of feelings while communicating. What does this mean? Well, think about it for a second. Any problem that you had, you always thought about it this way. I need to get this done first, then this other thing, then this, and then they all fit into place and gets this done. Does that sound familiar? It should if you're a normal man. With women, however, things are totally different and proves why men are better in some jobs, business, programming, and women in others, teaching, caretaking. This is another prime example that will get you closer to accepting just how different women's minds are. Mathematical abilities. An area in the brain called the inferior parietal lobe, IPL, is typically significantly larger in men, especially on the left side, than in women. This is the section responsible with mathematical ability, and probably explains why men perform higher in mathematical tasks than do women. What's even more interesting is that this area of the brain that was abnormally larger in Einstein. The IPL also processes sensory information, and the larger right side in women allows them to focus on specific stimuli, such as baby crying in the night. Reaction to stress. In stress situations, men have a response reaction that resembles fight or flight, while women react with a tend and befriend strategy. Psychologist Shelley E. Taylor first came up with the phrase tend and befriend after noticing that during times of stress, women tend to take care of themselves and their children, tending, and form strong group bonds, befriending. The reason behind these different reactions to stress is down to hormones. When someone is under stress, the hormone oxytocin is released into the body. In men, testosterone reduces the effects of oxytocin as it is produced in high volumes during stress. This explains the reason for the fight or flight response. In women, estrogen amplifies the effects of oxytocin, resulting in calming and nurturing feelings. Language. The two sections in the brain which are responsible for language have been found to be significantly larger in women than in men, indicating one reason why women typically excel in language-based subjects and in language-associated thinking. It's also important to mention that men typically process language in one hemisphere, whilst women process it in both. This difference offers a bit of protection in case of a stroke, as women may be able to recover fully from a stroke affecting the language areas in the brain, while men may not have this same advantage. What does this mean? Well, it clearly means that women are much better with languages than us men. You must have noticed at least one woman that seems to pick up languages very easily. Emotions. The most obvious difference is probably the emotions. Women have a larger, deep limbic system than men. It allows them to be more in touch with their feelings and better able to express themselves, which promotes bonding with others. This is one of the reasons why women serve as caregivers for children. Sadly, this comes with a downside, as this larger, deep limbic system also opens women up to depression, especially during times of hormonal shifts, such as after childbirth or during a woman's menstrual cycle. What does this mean? Remember that time when this girl you were talking to was looking at the other girl you noticed and believed that they were talking behind your back? Well, they weren't talking. They just look at each other and communicate. It amazes me sometimes how I have absolutely no idea what's going on. Anyway, this is probably the most important difference, and if understood, can change the way you interact with women. Let's put it this way. Women are in tune with their feelings. They are less in tune with their rational minds. So if you, the man, can make them feel good, all other things bear less importance. This is why when people tell you that looks don't matter, you should believe them. Don't get me wrong, they do matter in some cases, but most of the time it all boils down to how you make them feel. If you understand that making them feel good is what you should be doing, not impressing them with money, looks, muscles, or anything else, then you will have no trouble getting them into bed. Brain size. Typically, men's brains are 11 to 12% bigger than women's brains. Sadly, this difference in size has absolutely nothing to do with intelligence, but does explain the difference in size between men and women. Men need a bigger brain to control their bigger bodies and muscles. Pain. Men and women perceive pain differently. Studies have shown that women need more morphine to reach the same level of pain reduction. They have also shown that women vocalize their pain and seek treatment much quicker than men. During pain, an area of the brain called the amygdala is activated. Research has shown that in men, the right amygdala controls external functions, is activated, and in women, the left amygdala controls internal functions, is activated. This is the reason women seem to perceive pain more intensely than men. So what can we draw from this book? Most importantly, the fact that men and women are completely different. But do you know the fun part? We can't live without each other. What can we men do with this sort of information? Women like a man that understands them. Although you can't understand exactly what she's thinking, you can still understand that she is different, and the moment you accept her as that and respect her for it, she will see that you are different. She will feel good about you. She will believe that this guy understands me, not like the other men, and that is where your success begins. Men are like waffles. Why is it so hard to figure out the opposite sex? Because our brains work differently. Men's brains are really good at focusing completely on just one thought, and women's brains are really good at thinking many thoughts at the same time. This difference can make it hard to figure out what each other was thinking. To illustrate this, picture a waffle. A waffle has many squares, each divided by walls high enough to hold syrup. This is an example of a man's brain. Each waffle square is a thought or idea. In order for a man to change from one idea to the next, he needs to get out of the square he's in and climb over the wall to get into the next idea. Now picture a plate of spaghetti. This is an example of a woman's brain. Each spaghetti noodle is one thought or idea. However, each thought, noodle, is touching about 7 other thoughts, noodles, at the same time. Women are regularly thinking at least 7 thoughts at the same time. Understanding how our brains work differently will help improve our communication with the opposite sex. Advice to men. When she asked you to do a task, and then asked you to do 3 other tasks at the same time, remember that this is just how her brain works. Each thought is touching 7 other thoughts. Remind her that your brain works better when you can focus completely on one task at a time. Advice to women. Knowing how his brain is different should keep you from getting so mad at him when he is slow to change his attention from the TV to you. Give him time to move into a new waffle square when you need him to change his focus or thoughts towards you. Relationship brain chemistry. What to do when a woman cries. Many men are uncomfortable when a woman cries. Did you know that the chemistry of a woman's brain is different than that of a man's? The chemistry difference stems from our heritage of being hunters and gatherers. Men's brain chemicals are built to assist him in the hunt, while women's brain chemicals are built to assist her in gathering, nurturing children, and seeking help from others. When a man is upset, his brain chemistry will push him toward being alone. This increases his testosterone, which helps him feel good. Testosterone also reduces his stress. When a woman is upset, she looks for support, nurturing, caring, and love. This gives her oxytocin, which helps her feel good. It also reduces her stress. Men's bodies crave testosterone while women's bodies crave oxytocin. Let her release emotions. Bottom line, the solution is for her to release the emotion through crying. This is good for a woman. In women, crying is a release of pent-up emotions. The emotional centers of women's brains have 8 times more blood flow than a man's. Oxytocin tears are healing as they have chemicals in them that support healing and better feelings. What to do? 1. Basic. Ignore the tears. Don't let them bother you or affect you. 2. Intermediate. Listen to her. Allow her to emote without any solution or fixing. The solution is to let her cry. Have compassion and understanding. 3. Advanced. Touch her lovingly, and this means not sexually. You can do things like touch her hand, hold her hand or arm, hug her, hold her, or give her tissue and a glass of water. Support her. Don't leave her. Now, a man may want to leave her alone, which is good for a man, but this is not good for a woman, unless it's to give her time to vent with her girlfriends. This may be good, but it also may be more damaging. It's very difficult and painful for the woman to be left alone. When she feels hurt or sad, she wants comfort, nurturing, and reassurance. All of these increase her oxytocin, which helps her feel better and decreases her stress. If you need to leave, it's best to tell her, I need some alone time, I love you, and I'll be back. If you know where you're going and when you'll be back, especially the latter, then it's very helpful to tell her that. In addition, the woman begins to think of all possible negative situations. Her brain is built this way. A woman's brain is actually wired to be the village alarm system, to worry about all of the possible problems and to seek help. The man's brain is wired to quickly analyze the situation and do something if it's an emergency. If it's not an emergency, the man's brain is wired to forget it. A woman can't. So understanding these differences in the brain chemistry can assist men to understand how to support a woman when she cries. His reward is happier women. Not brain surgery. Everyone agrees that male and female brains are different, but it is difficult to tell just from looking how different they really are. First, one must get past the hurdle of trying to find someone willing to show you theirs if you show them yours. If you can, you'll note that the male and female brain are usually of approximately equal size and shape, although the female brain does tend to hold in its stomach while being inspected, and the male brain is frequently smeared with pizza sauce, usually sausage and green peppers. But scientists have found many gender-related brain differences that are interesting even to those of us who are not prone to spending our Saturday nights slicing gray matter with an X-Acto knife and staring at it through a microscope because we don't date much. For example, the sexes differ in the way we estimate time. Women estimate it fatter than it really is, while men estimate it much longer, especially when in the room with other men. There are also differences in the ability to visualize objects in 3 dimensions. Men's brains are better at this task, probably because women are too busy picking up said objects from the floor to have enough time to visualize them. Women's brains process language better, while men's process mechanical details, math, science, and the music of bodily functions. These differences explain why men are better at piloting aircraft, building bridges, and performing prop comedy, while women are better at poetry and writing ransom notes to their ex-husbands when the child support payments are not on time. One exception to the language rule is my next-door neighbor Herman, who, with the right electrical voltage, can speak monosyllabically in 13 languages, including the African clicking language, but he avoids the last one because his dog recently attended clicker training and will stay for hours at a time. One of the most recent findings has been the discovery that women's brains can easily handle multiple simultaneous tasks, while men's brains, when faced with having to remember the names of their children and shop from a list, often curl up and roll around inside the skull, softly whimpering "mommy." We know this from recent CAT scans of the brain of 500 men who thought they were volunteering to taste test the new full-bodied beer. Knowing how the brain differs according to gender may someday help educators teach more effectively, advertisers target their markets better, and visiting aliens choose whom to abduct, depending upon whether their laser thrusters are malfunctioning or the extraterrestrials need their closets reorganized, their wardrobe made over, and a new constitution written. We assume the aliens already know how to burp the alphabet. Chapter 2. How did the differences happen? Why the difference are there? Look at evolution. It's because men are made for fighting and hunting and women for caring for babies and the social group. But then, how does the brain become what it should be in men or women? Is this difference present from birth or only later on? Certain hormones, we call them sex hormones, start influencing a certain individual when it's still developing itself as a fetus. A male fetus, just 26 weeks old, shows a significant difference in brain from a female fetus. The disparities are found in the corpus callosum, bridge between left and right hemispheres, which in the brain of the female is much thicker than in the brain of the male. This is due to the fact that females use both their hemispheres, while males mostly left. Until puberty, girls continue to outperform boys in the use of language and fine motor skills. Boys show superiority over girls when it comes to math and geometry. These areas mature about 4 years earlier in boys than in girls. A recent study concluded that the brain of a 12-year-old girl resembles that of an 8-year-old boy when it comes to math. The specialties of the girls, though, language and fine motor skills, such as handwriting, mature about 6 years earlier. Also, after puberty, males contain about 6.5 times more gray matter, thinking matter, than women, while female brains contain about 9.5 times more white matter, connecting matter. But even more relevant is the fact that the frontal area and temporal area of the cortex are much more precisely organized in women and bigger. Because this explains the fact that girls often call boys immature or childish. The lobes that make you mature are much bigger, better organized, and earlier completed in women than in men. Nature versus nurture. But is it all nature? Nope. It all depends on how men and women use their special mental skills. Have you ever been wondering why doe females always feel the need to gossip? As stated earlier, females have a more sophisticated area for dealing with language, and therefore they use it a lot. And by using it, it becomes even more refined. So at the end, it will be this huge area. If a woman just doesn't speak very much because of her character or other circumstances, this area would not develop this much. And again, why this is can be explained via evolution or nurture in the first place. Women used to have the job to take care of children and establish relationships between social groups so they could stay alive. And we could also look at it as you got to make do with what you got. For example, when giving someone directions, men use a completely different part of the brain than women. Women use the cerebral cortex and mostly rely on landmark cues. Turn right at the supermarket. While men use a nucleus deep inside the brain and the left hippocampus and mostly rely on spatial aspect, depth reckoning, go west here. And then we haven't even talked about emotions yet. Women are faster and more accurate at identifying emotions. Coming with that is the ability to be more adept than men at encoding facial differences and determining change in vocal intonations, which explains why it seems as if every woman can sing amazingly well. But then there is a surprising twist when it comes to what almost everybody thinks: women just have much more emotions than men. This is not true. Women actually have a much greater control of aggression and anger than men. Men just don't show their emotions. It's weak, and therefore they always hide it, though their initial reaction to something is much heavier. Women, on the other hand, control their emotions and only show what is useful or can't hurt, but are also most of the time much softer in reacting when someone has done something wrong. What do we have in common? A lot, actually. Almost everything. Not only is every brain different, and there are men with lots of emotional control and women with more than average spatial skills. Take, for example, the spatial skills. Every part of the brain can be improved, but how the spatial part? Well, by just walking through space, doing sports, and boys get to do that much more than girls, which gives them a great advantage, therefore. If we'd treat girls and boys the same, they'd eventually become the same in the theory, which is quite logical, actually, and has research to prove it. He thinks, she thinks, how our brains are different. Anyone with workplace experience knows men and women process information and communicate differently. Dealing with gender differences can prove challenging, especially for managers and leaders. Regardless of which industry you're in or the position you fill, male and female coworkers can experience a shared event and come away with different emotional stories. We seem to be hardwired this way. Now that neuroscience is becoming more sophisticated with tools like brain imaging, what are we learning about the gender divide? Here are the key findings. 1. Emotions are useful. They make the brain pay attention. 2. Men and women process certain emotions differently. 3. These distinctions are a product of complex interactions between nature and nurture. Picture this. Several managers exit a stressful meeting where the discussion was lively and occasionally heated. A female manager jokingly asks her friend if all men are missing a gene for sensitivity. A male colleague overhears her remark and doesn't understand her reaction. As he reaches his office, he quietly shares a comment with a buddy about female emotional reactivity and then changes the subject to competitive bottom-line results. Both are intelligent managers on their way up, but if you listen closely to their accounts of the meeting, you would think they had attended separate events. Brain differences. We can look to biology and the brain for explanations. In Brain Rules, Peer Press 2008, molecular biologist John Medina cites these gender variations. Males have only one X chromosome, while females have two. As it happens, the X chromosome is a cognitive hotspot, carrying a large percentage of genes involved in brain development. The extra X in females acts as a backup in case of need. Men's and women's brains differ structurally and biochemically. Men have a bigger amygdala, a structure that processes emotions. Their brains also more rapidly produce serotonin, a neurotransmitter that regulates mood, learning, and memory, among other functions. Women have larger connectors in the corpus callosum, which links the brain's right and left hemisphere. Men and women respond differently to acute stress. Women activate the left hemisphere's amygdala and remember emotional details. Men use the right amygdala and more easily identify the gist of the situation. What do these disparities mean in the workplace? How do they manifest in male or female communications? How the brain processes stress explains some of these discrepancies. As noted earlier, the amygdala governs many emotional responses, as well as our ability to remember them. After experiencing a traumatic event, the female amygdala communicates with the left brain hemisphere. The opposite occurs in men. Their amygdala communicates with the right hemisphere. As a result, women remember the emotional details of an event, while men recall the ultimate outcome. Furthermore, women tend to use both hemispheres when speaking and processing verbal information, while men primarily use one. She's so emotional. The next time you hear men make the argument that women are more emotional, consider the following. Women have access to more emotional data. Their brains are built that way, allowing them to detect more emotional nuances. But too much emotional information can interfere with rapid decision-making. Men can more quickly pinpoint the overall situation. Neither gender is right or wrong, nor better or worse. If we recognize the basic brain distinctions in males and females, we can be more tolerant and forgiving of each other's shortcomings. Why men and women have different types of brains. Apart from the physical and biological differences between men and women, recent studies carried out by the National Academy of Sciences indicate that there are marked differences in the way human brains have evolved, not just socially and culturally, but also physically. From the findings, it would appear that men and women have brains with subtle differences, and the manner in which the physical arrangement of the neurons and nervous tissue is concerned. While people tend to confuse between the mind aspect and the brain aspect, it should be made clear that when we talk about the mind aspect, we basically refer to the thought process and the conscious, preconscious, and the unconscious states of the mind, i.e., the manifestation of the physical brain. The brain per se is actually the physical composition of cells and tissues, the tangible part. The studies carried out involving 1,000 young adults aged between 18 to 22 years reveal that there could be a physical difference in the arrangement of neurons and structure of the brain between two genders. The differences in brain pattern. Even though physical development and sexual dimorphism gradually starts diminishing once the individual completes puberty, the minds may keep on evolving, perhaps forever during the existence of the individual. As far as the brain is concerned, studies indicate that the brain pattern in males more front to back oriented, while in case of females, it's more left to right oriented. Even though the exact correlation is not still entirely clear, it would appear that the front-back orientation generally results into a particular functioning of the brain. Such an arrangement generally gives rise to coordinated action and perception. It would mean that the areas of brain responsible for these actions and traits are more strongly developed than others. In case of women, the left-right orientation generally results into a greater development of intuitive and emotional regions of the brain. This finding actually provides more credibility to the fact that women are more sensitive and emotionally inclined. It is not that they possess their traits owing to cultural reasons, but rather because their brains are more inclined to function that way. Gender roles and manifestations. The debate further continues as to did human brains actually evolve to function differently in men and women over the centuries, or does cultural differences in gender roles dominate and make the brains as they are today? The study still cannot accurately prove that the evolution occurred on its own, or whether it influenced the brain development in the first place. The theory of evolution indicates what is used more trends to grow and develop more, and what is used less trends to become redundant over time. So did the brains evolve in a manner such that masculine manifestation is actually different from that of feminine? There is no clear evidence supporting or negating this fact. Why it is important to understand how boys' brains are different from girls. Everywhere, inexperience and risk on the one side, care and steadiness on the other. Men, when they turn out well, are wonderful, but young males are so vulnerable and so prone to disaster. More than half of university graduates in the USA are female. So much has been done for girls lately, but boys have been left behind. Problems arise when parents and teachers do not understand the basic differences between boys and girls, and therefore fail to recognize what is really happening in their boys' lives and what role they need to play. It is that much easier for a mother to understand her daughter. After all, she's a female and was once a small girl and daughter. But it is different for mothers and sons. Having a brother may help explain some things, but it does not create a full understanding of what it is like to be a boy. The wonder, the endless energy, the excitement, the vulnerabilities, the uniqueness, and the testosterone surges. The difference in boys and girls are hardwired. They are inherent and not socially constructed. Male brains influence how boys see, hear, feel, learn, play, interact, socialize, listen. The list is endless. It therefore has implications for how to teach, parent, motivate, understand, and discipline boys. Why men's brain is bigger than women. Hemispheric compartmentalization of function in male brains. The left side of the man's brain is important for language, while the right hemisphere is not. The right brain in men has a spatial function, and the left brain is verbally oriented. Additionally, research shows that the proteins coded directly with the Y chromosome, that are so rich in many areas of the male brain, are completely absent in female brain tissue. Women also have higher brain flow per gram of brain tissue than men. In critical areas of the brain, women have larger brain cells that receive more inputs than the equivalent areas of the male brain. And in many tasks, brain imaging studies show that women use the most advanced area of the brain, the cerebral cortex, while men perform the same job using less evolved areas such as the amygdala and hippocampus. When we talk about differences, we talk about just that. They are different, not better, not worse. The example of whether a spoon or a knife is better for eating your dinner. Well, it depends on what's for dinner. A spoon is better for eating soup, whereas a knife is useless. And a knife is essential for cutting steak, while a spoon would be of no help. There is no difference in what boys and girls can do, but there is a big difference in the best way to teach them. It is therefore essential as parents and teachers to understand what male brains are good at, so that we can optimize these talents. It's also key to understand their weakness, so that we can save them from unnecessary struggle and find alternate ways for them to achieve the best results, using an approach that works well for their male brains. To use the cutlery analog once more, there are countless ways to give your son the right nutrients, but if he only has a spoon, don't make him struggle to eat a steak. Give him minced meat. Chapter 3. His and her brains at work. Are men's and women's brains different when it comes to the workplace? The answer is a resounding yes, and more importantly, science is finding that men and women work differently. When a woman works like a man does, her health suffers. Here are 3 things that are different in men's and women's brains. 1. Women are more emotional. Yes, women are more emotional than men, but on the positive and negative side. That's because women are designed to feel emotions more intensely than men. This also makes women more susceptible to depression than men, which bears out in the statistics. The good news is women can feel happier than men, but that doesn't mean men are heartless creatures. It just means that women have a bit wider range of emotions than men. On a related note, women have more wiring available to detect facial expressions than men. So women, you might have to give your man some extra clues to let him know if you are suffering and need his support. Men simply don't have the wiring to know when you might be sad until the tears start flowing. Then they get it. The good news is men can learn to detect facial expressions. Jobs like the police, detectives, attorneys, judges, ministers, and poker players all require exceptional people reading skills. and men who lack these skills can go through special training to pick them up. 2. Honey, I don't need to ask for directions. Generally speaking, men and women navigate differently. Men take more of a bird's eye view to get somewhere, relying on an allocentric approach. Women rely on local landmarks and how they are related to their own physical location in order to get from point A to point B, taking an egocentric approach. On a related note, men also perform better on a task called spatial rotation. It was on our IQ test in school, and it involved being able to mentally change the perspective of a 3D object in our minds and identify what it would look like when it was turned. 3. Darling, you hardly said a thing all night. Women have it all over men in the verbal department. The brain is functionally organized, and there are 2 parts on the left side of our brains, sometimes the right if you are left-handed, that control our speech and language processing. Women's are bigger. Women are also able to remember things better when the thing they are trying to remember can be associated with words. Please remember, these are all generalizations, so there will be individual differences that defy the averages. Men and women at work. Because of these brain differences, men and women's differences should be honored and celebrated in the workplace. Women who try to succeed at business using men's techniques will likely have health problems. One example is in sales. Men tend to conquer or capture the prospect to close the sale. It's like hunting. If men have fear or stress on the job, they simply force their way through it. They can do this being testosterone-laden. Women can't. Women need to build relationships. They need to embrace their fears and be supported, not fight their way through things. If they fight, they will burn out their adrenals sooner or later, or they will get sick frequently. When we can honor the differences of each gender, we can also leverage the unique strengths men and women bring to the workplace without trying to fit into one another's mold. It's the difference that makes it far more fun anyways. Gender-brain chemistry. One-task man versus multitasking women. Have you ever noticed that men seem to focus only on the task at hand, whereas the woman's mind has so much going on all at once? Women seem to multitask with much more ease. Men are better at focusing on the task at hand and completing the job before moving on to the next one. Let's make it easy to understand why this gender-brain difference occurs. I am going to explain the differences in both genders' brains' connectivity and how that affects the way that they are able to task manage. Gender-brain connectivity. Women's brains have a larger amount of nerves that connect the left and right hemispheres of the brain, which makes her more capable of multitasking. Her brain is hardwired to talk, think, listen, feel, plan, and remember all at once. A man's brain has 25% less connectivity in the corpus callosum, the link which provides crosstalk between the 2 hemispheres. This makes his brain more able to focus on a certain task, blocking out all of life's other distractions. The one-task man. With less connectivity between brain hemispheres, he is less inclined to talk, feel, and be able to articulate both at the same time. A man will more likely focus on the task at hand, sometimes even forgetting about everything else. Men separate their feelings and thoughts into different places in the brain. For example, a man loves his wife dearly. That is his feeling. But his task is to find a job to provide for his family, so his focus is job hunt, resumes, classifieds, and networking. Then he forgets his wife needs attention, love, and to feel emotionally supported too. It is not that he does not love her, it isn't that he doesn't want to listen about her day, but his brain is hardwired to focus on the task at hand, and that is to find that job. The multitasking woman. A woman's connectivity is like a super huge multi-directional freeway that is busily buzzing along. Having more connectivity between the 2 hemispheres allows her to think, do, and feel emotions and connect to them much more easily. She is able to articulate her thoughts much more quickly. She also can have many thoughts processing at one time. This is often why women feel much more overwhelmed than most men, and why he often thinks she is just blowing things out of proportion. For example, a woman wants to talk about the stress of her day, As she gets into about the third or fourth thing, her husband is ready to interrupt to offer his way to solve the problem. This is the difference in gender hardwiring for the brain. She is just looking to talk about things and discuss them, which helps her focus and actually solve issues by talking them through. He is hardwired to solve them quickly and move on. His brain is not thinking as many thoughts as hers, and she can't help but to be thinking, feeling, talking, planning, helping, and listening all at once. How to improve your brain. Aging isn't something anyone can avoid, but there is an increasing body of research showing us that there are things you can do today to help keep your mind sharp and your body healthy as you get older. But how do you improve your brain? The latest bit of evidence on vitamins, D in this case, and health comes from a population-based study of over 3,100 European men, aged 40 to 79, that found the subjects with high vitamin D levels did better on both memory and information processing tests than subjects with lower levels. Whether this vital, though underappreciated nutrient protects the brain cells themselves or key signaling pathways within the brain isn't clear, but the effect is certainly measurable. The study, a joint effort between University of Manchester experts and colleagues from other European centers, appears in the Journal of Neurology, Neurosurgery, and Psychiatry. The latest work follows research that made news this past January, suggesting high levels of vitamin D can help prevent the mental decline of the aging brain. Samples of blood were taken to measure vitamin D levels. Assessments also involved how physically active the men were, how they functioned in daily life, and reports on mood or depression. In the end, the men with highest vitamin D levels did best on the tests, and their cognitive performance was consistently better than those with the lowest levels. One surprise was that the difference appeared most strikingly in subjects over 60 years old. Why might this be? The researchers aren't sure, but suggest the vitamin might trigger an increase in protective hormones in the brain, though at present only animal studies back this theory. Other evidence suggests that vitamin D may work to calm down an overactive immune system or perhaps boost levels of antioxidants that work to detoxify the brain. So while experts can't explain precisely how vitamin D works, they remain confident that it does indeed have an impact on age-related cognitive function. As a fat-soluble nutrient, vitamin D is found naturally in only few foods such as oily fish, salmon, tuna, and mackerel, beef liver, fish liver oils, cheese, and eggs. Fortified foods are also available, foods like milk, ready-to-eat cereals, some brands of orange juice, yogurt, margarine, and fruit juices. Even so, eating a diet with enough of this nutrient isn't as easy as you might think, and is the reason supplements have become so popular. You'll want to talk to your own doctor to discuss your unique situation before you start taking any supplement. At present, the recommended intake of vitamin D is 400 to 600 IU a day for those aged over 51, though at least 1,000 IU per day is considered by many to be a more appropriate level for older adults. And while sunlight is also a natural source of this important vitamin, as we age, our skin is less able to absorb vitamin D from the sun, so older people depend more on food sources or supplements for this key nutrient. What's more, sunscreen of SPF 15 or higher, popular in our fight against skin cancer, are known to block almost all vitamin D synthesis by the skin. Being obese or overweight also makes your body less able to make vitamin D while you're out in the sun. Estimates of vitamin D deficiency suggest that 50% of adults and children in the United States aren't getting enough. And seeing that vitamin D is increasingly being linked to health benefits beyond the brain, things like reducing arthritis, osteoporotic fractures, not to mention heart disease and even some cancers, there's never been a better time to make sure you're getting enough. Chapter 4. Some significant differences. Do the anatomical differences between men and women, sex organs, facial hair, and the like, extend to our brains? The question has been as difficult to answer as it has been controversial. Now, the largest brain imaging study of its kind indeed finds some sex-specific patterns, but overall more similarities than differences. The work raises new questions about how brain differences between the sexes may influence intelligence and behavior. For decades, brain scientists have noticed that on average, male brains tend to have slightly higher total brain volume than female ones, even when corrected for males' larger average body size, but it has proved notoriously tricky to pin down exactly what substructures within the brain are more or less voluminous. Most studies have looked at relatively small sample sizes, typically fewer than 100 brains, making large-scale conclusions impossible. Adjusting for age, on average they found that women tend to have significantly thicker cortices than men. Thicker cortices have been associated with higher scores on a variety of cognitive and general intelligence tests. Meanwhile, men had higher brain volumes than women in every subcortical region they looked at, including the hippocampus, which plays broad roles in memory and spatial awareness, the amygdala, emotions, memory, and decision-making, striatum, learning, inhibition, and reward processing, and thalamus, processing and relaying sensory information to other parts of the brain. When the researchers adjusted the numbers to look at the subcortical regions relative to overall brain size, the comparisons became much closer. There were only 14 regions where men had higher brain volume and 10 regions where women did. Volumes and cortical thickness between men also tended to vary much more than they did between women. The researchers report this month in a paper posted to the BioR14 server, which makes articles available before they have been peer-reviewed. That's intriguing because it lines up with previous work looking at sex and IQ tests. That previous study finds no average difference in intelligence, but males are more variable than females, Ritchie says. This is why our finding that male participants' brains were, in most measures, more variable than female participants' brains is so interesting. It fits with a lot of other evidence that seems to point toward males being more variable physically and mentally. Despite the study's consistent sex-linked patterns, the researchers also found considerable overlap between men and women in brain volume and cortical thickness, just as you might find in height. In other words, just by looking at the brain scan or height of someone plucked at random from the study, researchers would be hard-pressed to say whether it came from a man or woman. That suggests both sexes' brains are far more similar than they are different. The study didn't account for whether participants' gender matched their biological designation as male or female. A new study on the physical makeup of the human brain has shown that men and women have differently shaped brains, with women possessing thicker cortices, a feature commonly associated with intelligence, and men having larger brains overall. Through use of MRI machines, researchers found that women's brains had larger subregions of the cortex, a part of the brain associated with memory, sensory input, learning, and making choices. Women's brains also tended to look more similar to each other than men's brains, which on the whole showed greater variety in size and shape. While general structural differences between men and women's brains do appear to exist, they remain minor enough to make it impossible to distinguish a person's gender solely by looking at a brain. Researchers have speculated that these differences in brain structure may account for gender-specific abilities and/or behavioral differences between the sexes. But Ritchie said that the study was about describing the differences as opposed to the causes. The differences in men and women even extend to the way our brains are built. In the largest study yet on sex differences in the physical makeup of the human brain, researchers from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland have shown that men and women do, in fact, have different brain structures and sizes. Women tend to have thicker cortices, which are associated with intelligence, whereas men's brains tend to be bigger overall. Although these differences can't prove that men and women behave differently, they could shed light on why some medications work better in men than women, and vice versa. Researchers looked at the brains of over 5,200 participants older than 40, roughly half men and half women. This group was part of the larger UK Biobank study, which is in the midst of collecting health data on over 500,000 individuals. For this particular study, patients lay down in a structural magnetic resonance imaging. These MRIs are able to parse out different types of brain tissues, like the neurons and the connections between them, which can give scientists a picture of the various brain regions. They found that on average, men's brains were larger, but women's brains had larger subregions of the cortex. The cortical subregions are discrete parts of this particular brain section associated with memory, sensory input, learning, and making choices. Additionally, there was a lot of variation in the sizes of different brain regions in men. Women's brains tended to be more similar to each other. The research, which hasn't yet been peer-reviewed, was published in BioAR 14 earlier this month. These findings aren't brand new, but most neuroscience studies to date only looked at a sample size of a few hundred participants. The thousands of brains here validated a lot of previous work. The fact that men's brains had more differences among them fits with a lot of other evidence that seems to point towards males being more variable physically and mentally. Stuart Ritchie, a psychologist and lead author of the paper, told Science. Similarly, it wasn't surprising to find that women tend to have thicker cortices overall based on previous findings. Paywall. The differences between men and women's brains were small enough that it'd be impossible for scientists to determine a person's sex by looking at his or her brain alone. Brain size and composition are characteristics kind of like nose shape. They depend on a lot of different genetic factors and can take on countless different forms. And although a lot of men have larger noses and brains than women, that's not always the case. And it's important to consider that different brain sizes and regions don't necessarily translate to actual behavioral differences, like intelligence. Our manuscript is just about describing the differences, and we can't say anything about the causes of those differences, Ritchie told New York Magazine. Different environmental and social factors play a huge role in determining the ways we think and interact with each other. Conclusion. Men relied on just one small area on the left side of the brain to complete the task, while the majority of women used areas in both sides of the brain. However, both men and women sounded out the words equally well, indicating that there is more than one way for the brain to arrive at the same result. For example, while women get stuck with a bad reputation for reading maps, it may just be that they orient to landmarks differently. And as for intelligence, average IQ scores are the same for both men and women. With greater understanding of the structure of men's and women's brains, he added, treatment of diseases impacting the brain could be improved through development of sex-specific medicines. Currently, scientists can't quantify how much an individual has male or female-like patterns of brain connectivity. Another lingering question is whether the structural differences result in differences in brain function, or whether differences in function result in structural changes. This has been Men's Brains, the male brain explained through neural analysis, written by Quinn Spencer, narrated by Eric Boozer. Copyright 2018 by Vincent Newt. Production copyright 2018 by Vincent Newt.